Welcome back. It's exactly 8:27 news and views on Salon Media. And our first interview is going to be exploring the issue around the shocking truth, I should imagine, behind the uprising in Kenya. And not only are we going to be talking to a Kenyan writer, activist, and independent scholar, we are also going to be talking with Professor at the University of Johannesburg, Department of Sociology, Professor Patrick Bond. He has just returned from Kenya. We're going to ask why he'd been there, what was his take on the situation. Obviously, I should imagine he was there in an observer capacity. So let's look at what exactly is happening in Kenya. Is this then the Kenyan uprising? It takes me back to many, many years ago when the uprising started in the Middle East. It started on a very innocent little matter, school kids scrolling some graffiti on a wall. That was the one issue, I think, tied in with something to do with some fruit seller. It was probably the fruit seller who scribbled some graffiti on the wall, and just look where that led us to. And it looks like here's another serious uprising in Kenya. So let's start with you first, Njuki. Many congratulations. Professor's just told me about an amazing achievement on your part. Tell us a little bit about it, through the University of Johannesburg, of course.
Great. Greetings from Nairobi, Kenya. Thank you so much, Julie, but also Patrick Board, because of inviting me to this show. It's the first time I'm going to this show, so I'm very happy to join in. My name is Njuki Gedheadwa. I am based in Nairobi, Kenya. I'm a scholar, really, and an activist of social movements and revolution, of which maybe the PhD will be, the PhD is being issued by the University of Johannesburg. And I'm based in Nairobi, and I've been mainly observing the uprising which is happening in Nairobi, but also involved in some way in terms of inspiring, but also keeping tabs of exactly what is happening in the country. So that's the basic background about me. But I've been an activist for many, many years, almost about over 15 years before I could become a scholar now of such movements.
People looking from the outside, looking at the situation, probably seem to think that it's a situation that's flared up. It might carry on for a couple of weeks and then it will die down. But it's a very complex situation, is it not? It's not only about an increase in basic commodities and the impact on the poorest of the poor. It runs much, much deeper than that. It's tied directly in with the issue of the loans to the IMF and other such international lenders. How do you see it, and how is this very serious situation going to be further impacted on the economy in Kenya? And is there a way that this very serious message can get to the people on the ground? As far as people are concerned, and if you try to explain this, if you try to disseminate this type of information to them, they're not really concerned about it, are they? They're more worried about the bread they have to put on the table. So your thoughts on that, Njuki, and then we're going to cross over to Patrick Bond. He has been in Kenya for a couple of days, and let's look at his perspective on this issue as well.
Great. Thank you again, Julie. A little bit of background, because nothing really rises without a cause and without a reflection of the historical processes that happened, even with the current uprising that we find in Kenya, as we have found elsewhere in a global globe and in Africa in particular. The root causes of the things that we are finding today in Kenya, the uprising we are finding today, is the deep social inequalities that we have been having in this country, and the gap between the poor and the rich since independence. And it has continued for many years that the poor continue getting poorer and the few rich continued continues growing rich. And successful governments in this country, since we gained independence from British colonialism, which is completely, we see it as flag independence, nothing has changed. The country for the region of Jomo Kenyatta up to Moi, up to Mwai Kibaki, and the current Uhuru Kenyatta and Moi and Ruto, nothing really has changed. There has been simmering discontent within the country, because once the poor are driven to the edges of survival, there is a lot of simmering discontent. And the Kenya, when Kenya got independence, it tethered its own economic and political direction towards the market-driven economics, and which is driven by the IMF and World Banks and other Western neoliberal interests. And these have continued to drive the people into the depth of poverty and despair and frustrations, and employment continued to increase in a huge way. So the country, all the years, have always been like that. They have never really bothered with the people. But now comes the regime of Ruto, President Ruto, and the KK group, and they took over power. But they rose to this country on the pretext that they will be able to bridge the inequality gap that were there. They talked about the economy being bottom up, meaning that it will be coming from the top up. They say they will not be beholden to Western interests and loan sharks. They said that they will be able to be so much bothered by the people that they call hustlers. The economy, there will be a little way of removing it from what they call the dynasty politics represented by Uhuru Kenyatta and the person who was backing Raila Odinga. And they'll try to bring a new order, a new socio-economic order. But over the years, since they got into power, the prices of basic things in food items, even in things like bread, cost of airtime, cost of fuel, many things that in this country have gone into terrible state of affairs, including closing down businesses. And we are talking of closing down businesses not only of the corporates, but also basic common people that we find on the streets, the kiosks that we find, the saloons, the barber shops, the shops that's selling basic goods. They are closing up. If you walk across Kenya, you'll find a lot of dead stock all over within communities that are there. But now Ruto and his regime says that we are in this hole because of the IMF, because of the loans that have been taken over by successive governments. And these loans were taken from IMF, the World Bank, and other Western interests. And he wants to bridge that dependence on donor funding. But the problem is that when you are in a hole, you are told not to continue digging that hole. That's the popular saying that I always say. Is the IMF which and the World Bank which drove us into this hole since independence, because we have been beholden to neoliberal market-driven economics. And we are, instead of us shifting the focus from measures that will draw us away from packaging by IMF, the current president, he continues to dig the hole and continues to tether the country much more into IMF and Western interest. The current package that we find, the finance bill that we find, it was completely chauffeured and driven over by the IMF and World Bank to be able to see what the president say that we want to cover the loopholes.
Okay, Njuki, I get the picture. Dire indeed. It's a very, very bleak picture that you're painting. Let's cross over to Professor Patrick Bond. And Patrick, morning. Welcome to the program. Nice to have you here.
Salam alaikum, Julie. Thanks for having me.
Walaikum salam. Walaikum salam. Lovely to have you. What Njuki just outlined there for us is a very bleak picture indeed, but it's a picture of Africa, is it not? We've seen this scenario play out over and over again in many countries in Africa. Kenya at this current moment is beholden to the loans that they got from the IMF, World Bank, etc. And if they don't repay those loans, there's going to be an issue around, I guess, the possibility of, borrowing will become that much more difficult in the short term. Over time, it could be more unemployment, more poverty, and really worse outcomes for Kenyans. But I think the other question to be asked as well is the cost of these debts, these loans. They are sorely needed, but at what cost do they come? And somehow the other government has to find the money to repay the loans. That's the one question. The other issue as well that we can't ignore is probably the same situation that we find ourselves in here in South Africa is cronyism, corruption, etc. Your thoughts, Patrick?
Well, Julie, this is why Salam Media is so important that you ask big questions, structural questions. You're not just floating on the surface the way most of the media covering last week's uprising were doing. They were obviously concerned with this finance bill, a tax increase of $2.5 billion worth. And that was obviously the source of the immediate anger and the 7 days of rage. And the police had killed a couple of protesters. And I just happened to, by coincidence, arrive in Nairobi as on June 25th, the parliament had been stormed by furious protesters who set parts of it alight. The police had responded with more than 20 murders of these protesters, and most of them non-violent. I was witness to one of those as I was driving from Nairobi out to the northeast on Tuesday night last week, where police were just shooting live ammunition at protesters on the highway, narrowly missing our automobile. Now, those were the sort of, let's say, surface level reflections of the tensions that Juki's just put to you. And I would, again, appreciate your ability to link to the Arab Spring, the North African uprising, which in December 2010 was caused similarly by the IMF in Tunisia, imposing two policies. One is cuts in corporate taxes, and the second was the value-added tax imposition. And as you said, Mohamed Bouazizi, the young Tunisian seller, a vendor of fruits and vegetables from his and surrounding gardens, who'd come into town. Didn't have the right paperwork, the VAT wasn't paid, the fruit cart was turned over, and that led him to self-immolate. He set himself on fire. Tragically, he died a few weeks later in the hospital, but it sparked that Tunisian uprising against the Ben Ali dictatorship, favored by Washington, both the US government and the IMF. And then on to Egypt, where Mubarak was tossed out. Within literally days of these big protests emerging. It felt like that last week. And what Ruto did very quickly, first on Tuesday night, he made the most arrogant speech I think I've ever heard a politician give, Juki. Maybe it's par for the course. But then he made this amazing U-turn. And I think it was because the US government intervened. So let me add not only to the deep structure, not just Africa, not just the North African uprising, but this tendency of the IMF to squeeze too hard. We felt it in South Africa in July 2021, 2 years and 11 months ago. Your viewers will remember what happened in KwaZulu-Natal and parts of Gauteng. And that was the IMF imposing through a June 2020 loan of $4.3 billion austerity. Austerity we're feeling today, and that because of the new government of neoliberal unity, I think it's best described as will continue. But these go back, Julie, to the early 80s with the third world debt crisis. And the IMF became let's say, the policeman for global finance, squeezing poor countries to pay debts. And the interest rate then, because of a man called Paul Volcker, the head of the Fed, had gone through the roof. The Volcker shock meant third world debt crisis was everywhere. It even brought down the South African government. 1985, a debt crisis. 9 years later, democracy. I think there's an important link. The other link to Washington was on Monday last week. Joe Biden, who just hosted Ruto, who'd taken an expensive private jet over to Washington the month before. And Biden had just made Kenya a so-called major non-NATO ally. And this was being broadcast everywhere. And it was a real signal that US imperialism found not only South African sub-imperialism, a little bit more unreliable after Naledi Pandor, the former foreign minister, went to The Hague, but Kenya as a very reliable, under William Ruto, sub-imperial military, economic, and ideological ally. And this, if you put it all together, is a structural critique a protest, the 7 days of rage, including a protest on Friday at the IMF, has a lot to recommend. And then I hope the next step is a debt audit, as you said, to ask who borrowed all of that money, $35 billion, a massive increase in the last 7 or 8 years when Ruto was deputy president. And should they repay? Isn't it odious debt? I don't know, Njuko, you were watching some of that unfold in Nairobi on Friday, questioning whether Kenyans should repay the IMF and indeed China for the overpriced, corrupt single gauge railway from Mombasa to Nairobi. So I suppose that's going to be, as you say, Julie, the central question to get out of this mess. Do you really have to repay that $35 billion in whole?
Okay, let's go for our first ad break. When we come back, we'll be talking some more on this issue and the fact that Ruto has said on Wednesday that he's not going to sign the controversial bill. After the ad break, we'll go to you, Njuki, first, and then back to you, Patrick Bond. Please stand by.
People of Palestine need your support now. Africa Muslims Agency is on the ground, already providing food, medication, and emergency supplies in Gaza. Donate any amount to Heal Palestine at africamuslimsagency.co.za. Africa Muslims Agency, empowering, educating, inspiring.
Yasin Badat Financial Advisory. Are your financial goals feeling out of reach? Yasin Badat Financial Advisory is here to turn your aspirations into achievements. Our dedicated team, armed with a history of success, is ready to guide you through the complex nature of financial and investment planning. Whether you're a seasoned investor or new to the game, our personalized solutions cater to your unique goals and risk appetite. Trust in our commitment to transparency, integrity, and excellence. Ready to unlock a world of financial freedom? Partner with us today. Call Yasin Badat Financial Advisory at +27 33 346 2071 or visit www.yasinbadat.com. Yasin Badat Financial Advisory, guiding you to financial success.
Sponsor an orphan, and you'll help support a vulnerable child to have the education they've always dreamed of, so they can build a brighter future. You'll be feeding a hungry mind with knowledge that will last them a lifetime. That's the power of an education. Sponsor an orphan now with Islamic Relief.
Contact Lenasia Livestock and Poultry for all your sadaqah, akika, and kurbani requirements. We offer clean, hygienic abattoir style and refrigeration facilities. Sheep, goat, and cows are available at competitive market-related prices, direct to the public. We slaughter, slice, and distribute on your behalf. But that's not all. Introducing Meat Masters Halal Butchery, our sister company situated on our farm in Lenasia. Unbeatable prices on lamb, beef, and chicken. Lenasia Livestock and Poultry. Livestock is our business. We are Sanha approved. Telephone 011 857 1774. Call now.
Attention drivers, revamp your ride with top quality tires at Best Drive Bromfontein. Our seasoned technicians guarantee a perfect fit for a smooth, safe journey. Choose from premium brands to budget-friendly options, all at competitive prices with special offers. From tire installations to brakes and shocks, we have all your vehicle needs covered. We also specialize in wheels, batteries, and suspension repairs. Get to meet our hands-on director, Mohammed Desai. With over 3 decades of experience, he ensures you receive exceptional service. Enjoy Salah facilities and a complimentary tea or coffee while you wait. Don't compromise on safety and performance. Ample parking available and full-time security on premises. Visit Best Drive Bromfontein today or call 011 837 4000 or 5000. We are 1 kilometer off the M1 highway. Take the Smith Street off-ramp towards Fordsburg, Fitas. Best Drive Bromfontein, where excellence meets service.
Connect and stay ahead with Salam Media. This is Salam Media, coming to you live from South Africa.
Welcome back. It is exactly 8:47. News and views on Salam Media. I did say to my two guests that we have at least a half an hour, so lots to uncover. But believe it or not, we've just got about 12 minutes to go to wrap up time. The question that I put before the ad break, I'm going to reserve for you, Professor Bond. You can respond to it. But my first question then will be to you, Juki, and that is, Ruto was elected on the promise that he would improve the lot of Kenya's youth and, of course, the poorer classes in Kenya, presenting himself as a break from the old corrupt political elite. Um, he's been quite a letdown with disappointment. What are the youth and the unemployed feeling about this letdown? Do they believe that the promise he's made that he's going to scrap the bill that he'd still be able to instill confidence in the people, very especially the unemployed youth in Kenya?
Yeah, sure. Thank you again. Once you lose the trust of the people, no matter what you do, you will never regain that trust. And this also goes not only to politics, but into many other areas of life. Ruto has lost the trust and confidence of millions of Kenyans, that whatever he says, he believes in it. And actually, I don't believe even himself he believes what he says. Millions of people don't believe what he says. So even if he says he has to withdraw, he has authorized Parliament to withdraw the bill. That is, the uprising is much larger than the finance bill. It is about the question of lack of loss of confidence in his leadership. That loss of confidence that he will not be able to cut down on wastage, on corruption, on the opulence we see with his cabal of leadership, members of parliament, and finance and ministers. We shall not see any hope inspiring to the people that he'll be able to uplift the people from poverty. There is nothing that he can do right now to be able to shore up the support and the confidence of Kenyans again. And I think this uprising definitely has shown the weak points that we have in this leadership. That is now, the campaign now has shifted from the finance bill to all of it telling him that it's your time is up. And
Okay.
Even if he brings on the people, I think this is exactly what now Kenyans are feeling, and we will see the next course of action.
We are seeing restless youth, not only in Kenya, but all around the world. And I think added to all of this, there is this conundrum that Kenya finds itself in, the implications of Ruto's promise of not signing off the controversial bill, but how then is he going to repay the loan to the World Bank and others? Whomever comes into that position of power ruling the country, Kenya, these are issues and matters that need to be handled. It needs to be addressed. How on earth are these issues going to be addressed? The country is crippled right now, and it seems that it's going to be further crippled. Your thoughts, Professor Patrick Bond, and I'm going to say it once again. Many countries in Africa are finding themselves in a similar situation, and it's truly frightening. It also kind of says to me that they talk about this new wave or the new world order has firmly got its grip on all developing countries. Patrick Bond.
Yes, that's right. And before just again talking about what Kenyans might be doing, listening to people including Obama, the sister of Barack Obama, the daughter of a great Kenyan Marxist theorist, Barack Obama Sr. I'll come back to her points on this question, but your general question of whether African countries are coming to grips with the debt crises particularly needs what I was able to learn from over last week in the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance summer school, which they do every year, and I am lucky to be invited to attend and lecture, but really to learn from 300 activists across Africa. It's exactly the same situation in places like Senegal, in Ghana, in Zambia, in Ethiopia. Those are four very high growth economies like Kenya, growing at 5% per year, except for 2020 COVID year. But they really suffer from climate catastrophes that mean where they would barely squeeze by paying debt. Now they all default. Kenya hasn't defaulted yet. Maybe it should. They have about 54 million people in Kenya, with a foreign debt of 35 billion. Interestingly, we have about 62 million people in South Africa, and our burden of debt is 160 billion. That's a foreign debt, and that we have a domestic debt. And like the Kenyans, I think we should be asking in South Africa, where did that money go? Why is it that Nelson Mandela inherited a $25 billion debt in 1994, one that many of us and the Jubilee movement and likewise our Islamic sisters and brothers in similar debt movements said, don't pay. That was illegitimate or so-called odious debt. And in international law, there is provision. And now what Kenya's just gone through is a terrible flooding this year. A couple of hundred people died. And then there were droughts in the COVID recovery years that really would have cut back their GDP a couple of percent. Now, these are climate catastrophes that were not caused by Kenyans. They have a relatively low carbon intensity in their economy. They don't have coal-fired power plants like we do. In fact, people like myself with a high carbon budget, because I fly around too much, we should be paying Kenya a climate debt. That would be one of the quick ways to respond to your question. Should Kenya pay? Well, some of their debt comes from the adaptation, the costs of paying for the kind of crises like we had in Durban. And you remember 2022 and April 12, we were hit with a rain bomb in Durban, 350 millimeters in just one day, which led to 500 deaths, with 3 exceptions, all Black South Africans, not white middle-class folk. And it's that degree of injustice that the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance is addressing. And I'm really happy that I think there was a general sense, look, if you're an African country, you didn't cause the climate catastrophe, you are a climate creditor and you should be paid by the northerners or people like me in a sub-imperial Johannesburg with a huge climate debt. Now, that to me is the sort of politics of climate finance that the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and our own former environment minister, Barbara Creasy, would not allow. There's even a provision in the Paris Climate Agreement. Don't talk about liabilities. Don't talk about who owes who when it comes to these climate catastrophes. So I think that's part of our story. Then the second part, I mentioned the sister of former US President from 2009 to 16, Barack Obama. Her name, Oma Obama, right? He is one half Kenyan, and the father, Barack Sr., was a terrific intellectual, and I still recommend his works to my students. So on Democracy Now!, a wonderful US television show last Thursday, Oma Obama was asked, quote, can you talk about the IMF pressuring the Kenyan government to enact these so-called fiscal reforms? Talk about the debt and what should happen to it in Kenya, why it's even called a debt. And Oma Obama, Barack's sister, right? So imperialist manager Barack Obama has a very progressive sister, very connected. She was tear gassed outside Parliament last Tuesday. And she said this in answer to that question, quote, why would you give somebody who has no way to pay you back a loan? None of us would do it if we're thinking sensibly. Here she's talking about not only the IMF and Western bankers, those who funded the euro debt that Kenya picked up, but also the Chinese, because they over-invested and didn't do corruption control on that very expensive Mombasa-Nairobi single-gauge railway. And then she continues, that's the question people who loan us money should be asking themselves. Why would we have such a high debt when we don't have good healthcare, when we don't have quality education, when we don't have roofs over our head? It doesn't add up. Now, I talked to the 300 people at the Chuka University, who, by the way, also had a protest in this very rural area. I mean, there were protests all over Kenya on Tuesday last week. And they were very clear that this is the sort of question that requires not IMF statements of concern. And you can go to the IMF website and see all of the rhetoric, but you can really also feel from the June 11, 2024, quote, staff level agreement with Kenya, which is what the IMF published just 2 weeks before this uprising. And that really shows that the IMF should be the subject of an odious debt audit, because they've made these loans knowing that the Ruto and prior administrations were very corrupt. And indeed, both Ruto and his predecessor, Uhuru Kenyatta, were in the International Criminal Court for their political bullying and thuggery when hundreds died after the 2007 election. So we're talking about quite, let's say, dubious capitalist elites, like you might argue we have a few of in South Africa. And that means the society is saying, let's have action. And the debt audit is what in Ecuador the people and even the government agreed to in 2006, and then they found so many corrupt loans that they defaulted in 2009, and that was a sort of movement that we've seen periodically. And the great analyst of this is named Eric Toussaint, and he's at the Belgium-based the Committee for the Abolition of Third World Debt. And his point, let me just finalize with this quick comment: in all circumstances, there should be a debt audit to identify which parts of the debt demanded of a country are odious, illegitimate, illegal, and or unsustainable. In some cases, a country's entire debt may be considered odious. So those are some of the, let's say, lessons from the Kenyans, drawing on other such struggles. Protests in the street, as Njuki says, a youth-based movement that wasn't hampered by ideology of let's say, ethnic orientation or party affiliation, but was an uprising of a national character. And then the question of, well, why is that government so incapable of giving people a break in the social policy and welfare and health and education, water and sanitation, electricity at the level that they deserve, and that the country does have the wealth to provide? And the answer to that has to be, I think, in uprisings to basically unveil the venal character of the elite, delegitimize them, and then move onwards to demand of the creditors like the IMF and the Chinese state banks, should we pay? What do we owe? And because Standard Bank has been one of the banks from here in Johannesburg across Africa lending for terrible projects, the Uganda-Tanzania crude oil pipeline, the blood methane extraction from northern Mozambique, all over we have a sub-imperial financial system. I hope that the Kenyans start asking tough questions for solidarity activists here in South Africa to listen to, learn from, to act, and then to demand very much the same kinds of debt audits from our own.
There's so much more, Professor, so much more to cover, but we have run out of time. My final question is to you, Njuki, and as a young Kenyan based in Kenya, are you hopeful? What is the way forward? Do you believe what obviously Ruto has been saying? Do you believe that if he doesn't sign the bill, peace and calm will come to Kenya? Is that just a quick fix in your belief? How does the youth of Kenya and the people of Kenya move forward regarding this matter?
Yeah, there is nothing that now Ruto will do in terms of quelling the mass discontent. Once you lie to people that you believe in them, and then you come around and lie and say that you believe in them. Once you say in a day earlier that in a press conference that the people who are demonstrating were criminals, and then you come the following day looking very meek and say that you agree with what they say, they will see it as doublespeak. There is loss of confidence definitely in the Ruto's government. And I think this is very unpopular regime that now will govern with a lot of difficulties. Because when people lose trust in you, and the entire uprising is spread throughout the country. And even members of parliament are not secure in their own regions because hordes of people are being for their survival. They cannot be able to do public events and many other things.
Okay, Njuki, let me ask you this important question. What do you as a Kenyan believe needs to happen at this point in time to quell all the violence, for people to settle down? And how does Kenya then move forward? Short and sharp answers, please.
No, I believe that Ruto has lost confidence, and definitely he must resign and give way to a new regime that will be caring to the people of Kenya.
Will the new regime not be bogged down with all of this historical debt and this historical trauma and this historical mess that Kenyans find themselves in?
It will have a fresh breath of life. it will move towards inspiring confidence in the Kenyan people. And we shall deal with those issues and difficulties by involving the people in terms of shaping their own destiny without being beholden to Western and imperialist interests.
A short, sharp answer from you, Professor Patrick Bond. Do you agree with Njuki regarding a quick fix solution, and then the Kenyan people can try and find their feet and move forward in a very positive way?
Oh, I really hope so, because the dilemma, Julie, for all of those other countries like Tunisia and Egypt, where you throw out the bad government, well, unless you really have a deep movement that sustains itself, demanding democracy and economic justice, well, you might win by replacing the deck chairs on the Titanic, moving them around a bit, but the ship is still sinking. And so I think it will be up to these movements to show that they're more than just popcorn protests, that they're durable, democratic. And I've been very, very impressed by Kenyans the last week. They've got a lot to teach organizers in South Africa about making the link between economic justice and climate and bad government and delegitimizing an elite, and hopefully, as Njuki says, tossing them out of power so you can restart much more profoundly.
Professor Patrick Bond, you are at the University of Johannesburg. Thank you indeed for your insights. And Njuki Githewa, I hope I'm saying that correctly. Finally, Kenyan writer, activist, and independent scholar. Thank you indeed for your insights on the show this morning. Hope to catch up with you guys again sometime in the future. God bless and go well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie.
9:04, and we're now going to be crossing over to our correspondent with the Bulletin of the Morning.